Let's look at this weather story. The heatwave sweeping across parts of southern Europe and northwest Africa. Potential record-breaking temperatures in the coming days. Expected to hit 40 degrees in parts of Spain, France, Greece, Croatia and Turkey. In Italy, temperatures could reach 48.8 degrees. A red alert warning has been issued for 10 cities, including Rome, Bologna and Florence. On Tuesday, a man in his 40s died after collapsing in northern Italy. The question we're asking here, is this heat wave climate change in action, or is it just the summer? It does get hot in summer. And by the way, I'll give you that answer shortly as well about how many people haven't survived extreme weather conditions since the 1970s. I'll come back to that in a few moments. Jim Dale is a meteorologist and author of Whether or Not: The Personal and Commercial Impacts of Weather and Climate. And Chris Morrison, who is environment editor at the Daily Skeptic. Afternoon to you both. So, Jim, I've lost count of how many people have come back from Europe on holiday, myself included, and gone, blimey, it was hot out there. It was 43 degrees. We're all used to seeing that. That's not an unusual story, is it? It's summertime.
Yeah, it is, actually. 43 degrees is a very unusual temperature for Europe. If you go down to Spain or Italy, you don't expect to see 43. You might expect to see 30, 35 at a push. Look, temperatures at the moment right across that quadrant of North Africa and into southern Europe. And by the way, up into Russia and Siberia included, silly temperatures, 35 degrees. So this isn't just a small sample, if you like, of a couple of days of extreme heat where, you know, people are getting a bit flustered. This has got climate change written all over it. And I'll tell you why. There's something connected to these temperatures that is going sort of being missed, if you like, and that is the sea temperatures. Mediterranean, our own North Atlantic, North Sea, they are 5-6 degrees, if not a little bit more, above where the average is. Something's going off, and in 40 years of meteorology, and I'm not on the side of the Met Office. I'm independent. I'm giving my own view. I've never seen anything quite like this in terms of the global phenomena that is occurring right around the globe. And I could probably bore you to death and mention many places that have broken records in the last 2-3 weeks. And maybe you've also seen some of the chaotic floods that have followed. But let's just stick with the heat for now.
Chris Morrison, environment editor at the Daily Skeptic. You heard what Jim said there, Chris. This has got climate change written all over it.
Well, I don't know how he knows that. There's no proof for it. It's purely an opinion, for a start. When he talks about records, he's really talking about recorded records. The records only go back 100 years, 120 years. They're not very accurate. They're not even very accurate, as we've seen with recent information from the Met Office, of late. We're living actually in one of the coolest periods of the last 10,000 years. It was probably warmer in the medieval warming period. It was certainly warmer in the Roman period. And it was much, much warmer, 3-4 degrees warmer, 8,000 years ago when all the ice sheets disappeared from Europe. So this is nothing unusual. We would expect to see slightly higher heat records because we're coming out of what was called a little ice age when the Thames froze. And it was very unpleasant. It was actually very, very cold. And the last 120 years, we've had this rather benign climate where it's warm very slightly. There's been a little bit more rain. There's been a little more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, some of it from the warming of the oceans. And this has actually been almost wholly benign. It's been almost wholly advantageous. But don't let them sort of trick you into going along with this collectivist net zero agenda by saying the climate's collapsing. It isn't. Always ask for proof. And the idea that you can attribute individual single weather events to long-term climate change is ridiculous.
Jim Dale, you're making mischief here, Jim. It's been hotter many times in the past.
Yep. Me, NOAA, NASA, WMO, IPCC, we're all making mischief. All the scientists, all the eminent climatologists, making mischief, while the few on the outside, the fringe, if you like. And Chris, I don't know you, Chris. I've never had a conversation with you. I don't know what your meteorological qualifications are for giving what you've just given. I think I'm the only meteorologist here. I've been doing this for 40 years, as I've said, and I've actually seen and observed what's going on. And it isn't just, you say this is a one-off event. Well, wait till next week. Wait till you see the USA and what happens there next week. And we may well be talking about that in terms of reaching 50 degree plus. Algeria reached 50 degree plus last week. This is not an isolated event, and these scientists are not idiots. They do their work expertly, diligently. They've got no agenda. The agenda is all on the denial side, the shrinking denial side. They've had a bad couple of weeks. Let's make it absolutely clear. And that's the position that I say. So just watch the space ahead of you. And by the way, looking back, at all those periods that have gone, if you like, we can do that. We can go back to the dinosaur period, if you like. Those temperatures, those periods, if you like, were measured over hundreds, if not thousands of years, not just the last 30 years, where we've seen accelerating temperatures right off the scale that will break 1.5 degrees C in terms of where we shouldn't be going from the start of the Industrial Revolution. So that's going to happen. All I say is watch the space. I think we're at a tipping point. I'm not here to give scare stories. I'm here to give the facts, and those are the facts.
There it is, Chris. You don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you think it's a tipping point, and the operative word there is doing a lot of heavy lifting is the word think. It's all opinion. This idea that there was, do you remember last week, the idea that there was 3 days of the highest temperature ever? It was due to a model called the Climate Reanalyzer. And I just had a small piece here that the Climate Reanalyzer said, and they make the point, I'll just read it if I may. They say, it is important to note that much of the elevated global mean temperature signal in recent days can be attributed to weather patterns in the southern hemisphere that have brought warmer than usual air over the certain portions of the Antarctica. In other words, there was a very simple meteorological explanation for why we had those 3 days of the hottest temperature ever. And we were led to believe that within a couple of days, the global temperature had leapt by 0.22 centigrade. It's all just made up. And you'd say, of course I'm not a meteorologist. Doesn't mean to say you had to be a meteorologist to comment on science and the weather. I'm a journalist. It doesn't help. Well, of course, it does help in the sense that you
must help. It must help a little bit, Chris. Otherwise, we wouldn't have meteorologists.
Yeah, my job is to observe the weather, and year in, year out. I started in the Royal Navy observing the weather. That's exactly what I did around the globe. And since 1987, since the birth of the British Weather Service, that's basically what we've been doing. And it's there are better people than me, make it absolutely clear. And there are a lot of people better than Chris in terms of interpreting this data, knowing the direction of travel, seeing that it's just not a one-off exercise. You talk about a 2 degree or 3 degree. I don't know whether you're talking about the UK or Europe, but this is the records in terms of maximum temperatures have all occurred. I'm talking about the globe now, virtually all occurred within the last 20 years. Now, what else has happened in the last 20 years? Fossil fuel usage has gone up exponentially. In other words, the two go together without a shadow of a doubt. And sometimes I wonder about the Daily Skeptic and others, what their motives are for actually coming on and actually saying what they say in the face of the obvious climate change that is going on. Now,
can I just throw a question into you, Jim? Because it's interesting you said about fossil fuels going up. I'm not going to dispute that. I don't have the numbers. But the perception on the outside, and you think to yourself, well, surely we must be using half of what we used to use. We drive electric cars now. We have different ways of heating homes. Surely, by any measure, we use fossil fuels far less than we've ever done in history.
No, I don't think so. I think the records, although I'm not a fuel expert, I would suggest reading stuff that I've seen that fossil fuel usage is at its peak. It did sink during COVID. That's absolutely sure. It lost a few percentages for obvious reasons, but it's reclaimed them. Places like China, even though China is trying very hard with the solar power and all the rest of it and going in the right direction with that, we're in an evolution, not a revolution. So that continues to go up. And I'm saying now we're reaping the benefits, the downsides of all of this. I think people can feel this when they go, and you're showing pictures of forest fires. I mean, Canada's been on fire virtually for the last month and a half. I mean, how much evidence do we require?
Okay, let me put that to Chris. I mean, there's a lot. We see this imagery. A couple of years ago, we saw extraordinary floods in Germany, Chris. We've seen fires in Canada. Italy is going to be so hot you won't be able to get into a swimming pool because the water will be arguably boiling. Jim's point there is, how much evidence do you need?
What Jim's done is cherry-pick weather events, single weather events, but all of which have occurred in the past. We're just talking about temperatures in a period of small warming that's slightly higher than they were before. And then if you actually take, though, Jim's always questioning. He questions me on social media about my qualifications. I'm a journalist. I look at the science. I'm a science journalist. If you look at and I look at climate change, not just individual weather events that are used to scare the pants off us. If you look at the satellite record, the most accurate record we have, we'll see that there's been a pause in global temperatures for eight years, nearly 9 years. Now, when you mention that, Google actually bans that page that shows that, although it comes out at the University of Alabama in Huntsville and is compiled by 2 NASA scientists. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's the record that is accurate that shows that temperatures haven't risen in overall in the world. You can cherry pick all you like. It was the coldest November in Antarctica last November. It was the coldest winter in Antarctica over 6 months in 2021. You never hear Jim talk about that. All he does is
Chris, there's no cherry picking. What we're doing, I'll tell you what scientists are actually doing. We're joining the dots from all the climate events, oceanography events are occurring. Temperatures off the Florida coast, for example, they're at 95 degrees F. That's what you would be in a warm shower. Corals are going to be dying because of that. There's no cherry picking here. The reason it's not cherry picking is, okay, the UK is a bit isolated at this moment in time, and it's cool and showery weather. That's kind of normal. And yes, we've had hot summers before, and records have been broken. All of that is part of the normal cycle, if you like. But what we're seeing is the topping, if you like. It's the additional adding on, and it's not cherry picking. It really is time after time of seeing records broken left, right and centre, both minimum, maximum and sea temperatures, Arctic and Antarctic ice loss, Antarctic sea ice that is, at record levels. I look at these data all the time, and it is quite scary.
Let's look at the Arctic. Which is not mentioned in all this hula about hottest days ever. Let's look at the Arctic sea ice record. It's been slowly recovering since 2010, if you run a moving average trend on it. And last month, June, when there was all this heat, we were all boiling up alive, it was the 13th lowest recorded surface sea ice. It's recovering. It's a stonking recovery.
No, it's not. Chris, what you're doing, I'll tell you what you're doing, Chris. You're reading stuff that's funneled towards you by the climate change, by the...
Jim, if we just let Chris complete that point, and then I'll come straight back to you.
I want to make the point about Greenland, if I may. The Greenland ice sheet, which last year, on a margin of error basis, possibly put on actual the volume, this year is well above, at this point in the sort of the small melting season, is well above the mean for 1980 to 2010. And you can look at that on the polar portal run by the Danish Meteorological Society.
Now, Chris,
why haven't we seen any cherry picking in the Arctic of late?
Okay, Jim, maybe you can try and answer that, Jim.
Chris, you talk about cherry picking. You just cherry pick the biggest cherry tree in the world. You can obviously pick places like the UK at this moment in time. And you're quite right about Greenland in terms of this year so far. It's one of the coldest spots. It hasn't lost ice as much as it should. Having said all of that, that's what's called cherry picking. That's what you're looking at. When I can say to you, I wish I could. I could probably have a list of 100 and 1,000 places where I can say this is climate change in action to one degree or another, not all at once. And that's how it works. It doesn't work all at once and we all die tomorrow. That's not what this is about. We're seeing is an acceleration of events that is quite plain to see, that 97% of climatologists throughout the world agree with. You're in the 3% that don't. You read off information that is just fed to you, and that's why you're a journalist. That's what you do. You read all of that and you verbatim put it out as truth when it isn't.
Jim, can I just ask you a question, Jim? Do you believe that if we stopped drilling for oil tomorrow, all of this would go away?
No, I don't believe that, because there is obviously going to be a time lag. I think we've crossed a pivotal point, but that doesn't mean we give up. We're not crazy in this world. You know, as I mentioned, evolution, not revolution. We can't just suddenly stop driving, cars and everybody gets an e-car tomorrow. That's not going to happen. However, there is maybe this should have happened 30 years ago, where the deniers, if you like, were still denying. And
but why, Jim? The bit I've never... Sorry to interject, Jim. I'm genuinely confused about this, and I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will be as well.
Sure.
Given the nature, the emergency nature that you are talking about here, yourself and others, wouldn't governments naturally... I mean, we're talking about the end of the world as we know it, not the end of the world, but the end of the world as we recognise it and have done for many years. Why would governments not be acting on that? Surely it's not because they're doing their mate in the oil industry a bit of a favour. I mean, does Rishi Sunak or Boris or Macron or Biden, any of these people, they really want to go down in history as the people that killed the planet? They'd be doing something, wouldn't they?
Well, look, the IPCC reported... These are government organisations, if you like, government organisations within the IPC. So government countries basically agreeing the path of travel. Now, some are getting there faster and others are getting there slower. We've just put our anchor down. And there is one big reason why anchors go down. Make this absolutely clear. It's called cash from oil and gas producers coming into the country or coming into party coffers. That's what it's half about. But many countries are adhering to the IPCC report. They're striving to get there. That's why all the action, they call it the green action, the environmental action, is going in that direction. And it is also why likes of Chris are fighting tooth and nail to oppose it on behalf of the fossil fuel companies.
Guys, we will speak again on this. Jim Dale, meteorologist, with us. Chris Morrison, environment editor at the Daily Skeptic. Thank you, gentlemen, for that.